I'm taking a drug for 10 days. How can something hurt me that I just take for 10 days?
And that's what I think the scariest thing was for my wife. She just didn't know who I was, and I didn't either.
I'm sorry, but no parent should have to watch a child go through something like this. Not when it can be so easily avoided.
You feel like, maybe a part of you is just like, taken away but, like, what can you do? There's nothing you can do about it now, except, help other people so, they're not in it, especially kids. Like, I was 14, so.
There was a time when the FDA and the US regulatory system was really the gold standard, and the rest of the world looked up to the United States in terms of being the leader in protecting the consumer.
The FDA's job, as mandated by law, is to decide whether a drug is safe and effective enough to be approved for a given indication.
What we've seen over the last couple of decades is an erosion of the regulatory power of the FDA and an unwillingness to use their authority.
2/3 of the money that the FDA spends on reviewing drugs comes in direct cash payments from the industry. It has distorted enormously and dangerously the mission of the FDA.
How are we's doing? How are you's doing? He's calling from New Jersey. Can you tell?
How you all doing?
Yeah, there you go. I've been a pharmacist for almost 25 years now. And for the first 15 years of my career, I owned 2 pharmacies in downtown Baltimore. I also have a radio show called Your Prescription for Health that airs here in Baltimore on a local station called WCBM. Now, Ray, how long has it been since we beat up on our friends at the FDA?
It wasn't that long ago.
I know. We practically do it on a weekly basis, I think.
The FDA's got a place, but I don't know if it's serving the needs of the people, because the needs of the people are paramount. But the FDA stands for, what does it stand for?
But we're going to do it again today because, there's something else that I got a question for you about it. I want to get your comment, and I just want to talk about it a little bit because, what was it, 4 years ago, it was the FDA's 100th birthday, right? Remember, I wrote that article about, and what we did is we found their mission statement off of their website, and then we just tore it apart and said, well, you're not doing this, you're not doing this. And they're not living up to the mission in any way, right?
A few years back, we were talking to an FDA investigator who was investigating an alternative medicine doctor and was interviewing us in relation to that case.
Right.
And, he says to us, he leans forward and he says, off the record, the drug companies are, the FDA is run by the drug companies.
Did we just put that on the record?
Well, I guess. Technically, I guess we did.
Yeah.
Is it the FDA's role to protect people from the medications? The people would believe that that is in fact true.
Oh, yeah. When they take a drug, they are under the false impression that this drug has gone through sufficient testing to prove its safety and effectiveness.
Right.
And that they take it with a degree of confidence, knowing that it's likely going to do what the doctor told them it's going to do, and it's likely not going to hurt them.
And it kind of blew me away that an FDA investigator would actually say this, to us, and we're not friends with this guy.
Right.
So it's something that I think even a lot of the agents and the people in the FDA, I think it bothers them to a degree.
It should. It should. How many of the upper FDA people, when they decide to stop working for the government, end up with a cushy pharmaceutical industry job?
Right.
A lot of them. What they
Right.
become are basically shills for the pharmaceutical industry.
Public Citizen is a nonprofit public interest organization that works for consumer rights in a variety of areas, including health, safety, automobile safety, good government, open government, trade, a variety of areas. In the litigation group, much of our work is challenges to either agency action or inaction. And we're challenging the agencies to live up to the statutory mandates that Congress passed when they established the agencies and gave them authority to regulate to protect the public. Preemption is essentially a doctrine in the law which says when the federal government has regulated in a particular area, then other kinds of regulation by the states or tort suits in the state courts may be preempted. In other words, barred, because the federal government has sole authority to regulate in that area.
One of the areas in which we're really fighting hard against preemption is the area of pharmaceuticals, drugs that are approved by the FDA. And the argument in its most basic level is, well, you can't sue to recover damages for your injuries from a mislabeled or defective drug, a drug that really shouldn't have been on the market or shouldn't have been labeled the way it was, because the FDA approved it. But let's remember, the FDA is underfunded. It relies on information entirely given to it by the regulated entity, by the drug company. You know, people have a misapprehension, I think. They think the FDA is out there doing clinical tests and approving a drug because it's really in its own laboratories determined that the product is safe and effective. No, 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 that's not how it works. The way it works is that the industry itself, the company itself, gives it all the information that it's going to rely on in deciding whether to approve that drug. That's one problem with the preemption. The other is, if we have preemption, what we do is we freeze the regulatory process on the day the product was approved. But the way science works in the real world, the way we learn about problems with drugs or medical devices that are regulated by the FDA, there are small clinical experiments done before a product is approved and put on the market. But after that, when it's marketed, there is in effect a huge clinical experiment that takes place on the American public. I don't say that in any pejorative way. That may be necessarily how the system has to work. But then we learn a lot more about the product, and lo and behold, we find out that a product, causes tendon ruptures, or a product causes suicide, even though it was intended to counteract depression. In fact, it causes suicide. And the trouble is, if you say there's preemption, that is, that people can't recover damages, even though we learn new things about the product, we freeze in place the regulatory system. We don't have the proper incentives in place to get the best products on the market and to remove products when they should be removed from the market.
Our position has always been that we should simultaneously have the regulation of the FDA to try to ensure health and safety, but we should also have the regulation provided by the market, by the personal injury tort system, which through the threat of litigation and having to compensate victims for their injuries, the drug company behavior has changed and they become concerned about safety, not just to satisfy the FDA, but also to avoid the risk of litigation.